Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
My brother-in-law died suddenly, and now my sister and her kids have to sell their home. That's why I told my husband we could not put off getting life insurance any longer. An agent offered us a 10-year, $500,000 policy for nearly $50 a month. Then we called SelectQuote. SelectQuote found us identical coverage for only $19 a month, a savings of $369 a year.
Whether you need a $500,000 policy or a $5 million policy, SelectQuote could save you more than 50% on term life insurance.
For your free quote, go to SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. That's SelectQuote.com.
SelectQuote. We shop, you save. Full details on example policies at SelectQuote.com/commercials.
Hey y'all, my name is Abigail Franks and I'm your host for today's show, while our other host, Mauricia Malcolm, is doing some filming work in Miami. Numerous studies have shown that mindfulness and meditation are incredibly beneficial to our health and well-being, and many are drawing connections to the practice's ability to increase engagement and avoid burnout. However, in an age of nonstop notifications and divided attention, coupled with the stressors of climate change, mindfulness may feel like a privilege only a few can achieve or access. Guest speakers Knellee Bisram and Piero Falci from the organization AHAM Education dispel that myth and more in this episode, urging all of us to understand that when we practice mindfulness, we aren't just practicing for ourselves, we are practicing for the world. Climate justice, y'all, it's real, it's here, and it's about time we listen to folks like Knellee Bisram and Piero Falci. All right, let's get started with the show. This is Climate Justice, Y'all, a podcast dedicated to lifting up and centering the climate and environmental justice movement in the South. Despite the South being the most biodiverse, diverse, and one of the largest economic engines in the world, we are underfunded and often barred from the decision-making table. Because of that, we decided to pull up a chair and amplify the stories of communities in the South that are hit the hardest by the climate crisis.
We're using good old-fashioned storytelling to shine a spotlight on these Southern leaders from all walks of life, putting in their blood, sweat, and tears to transform the region. The usage of y'all in the title is on purpose. We are honoring our Southern heritage of creativity, resilience, and ingenuity. Climate justice, y'all. It's real, it's here, and it's about time y'all hear what we have to say.
Good morning or good afternoon, whenever y'all are listening to this. Today, we have an episode that I think y'all are going to really love, especially, well, you know, I love it, and hopefully y'all will love it too, because we're going to be talking about healing yourself to heal the planet and why it's important to take care of ourselves in this fight. But first, let's get our fantastic guests introduced and get them to tell you about themselves. So, Knellee, if you could start first, please introduce yourself, your organization, and where you're calling in from.
Hello, everyone. Yes, so my name is Knellee Bisram. I am here in the land of the Taino, the Tequesta, the Seminole, and what we currently know as South Florida, in Sunrise, Florida, near the Everglades. And I am the founder and CEO of AHAM Education. I'm also the lead representative to the United Nations. And we are a member of the Southeast Climate and Energy Network. I'm also a mindfulness student and teacher. I've been practicing for many years, for most of my life, and teaching for the last, 15 to 20 years. And AHAM Education is an NGO. I like to call it a social investment initiative with a 501c3 status here in the United States, where we work transnationally in the US, in Latin America and the Caribbean. And our mission is to touch 1 million people by 2025 with tools that empower especially young people and underserved communities, empower them with tools that cultivate presence, positivity, and peace. Those are the three pillars of our work. And so we see the work of climate justice, of healing of the healing of the planet and healing people as intertwined. And so that's one of the kind of the ways in which we bring presence, positivity, and peace to individuals, communities, and the world.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Knellee. And Piero, please introduce yourself. Where you seem to wear many hats alongside Knellee, and where you're calling in from.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Piero Falci, and I'm calling from South Florida, just like Knellee. We're neighbors, if you will, living in cities not too far away from one another, and we do programs together. So I like to introduce myself by my main activity, which is I am a mindfulness meditation and mindful living teacher. So I teach mindfulness techniques and several programs, some of them very well-established programs, such as the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, a program that was created more than 40 years ago, and other well-established programs, mindfulness for teenagers, teaching relaxation techniques for populations with trauma through the model of the mind-body skills groups that both Knellee and I teach sometimes together. So I am also a board member of AHAM Education, and one of the things that I am especially proud of is the program that we teach called Be Nature. Our idea is that we are not a part of nature, we are not in nature, but we are nature, something that we try to infuse in the participants of this, sometimes a workshop, sometimes a retreat. And I'm also an author. I like to write, and my latest book is actually a 3-book series called Mindfulness and for a Better Mind, Life, and World. And in it, we talk about how mindfulness can help individually somebody, but how can mindfulness is something that is necessary for the healing of the world. So I'm very happy to be here, Abigail. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. And fantastic backgrounds too. If anybody's an expert, it's these two. Absolutely. So I know this may seem like a super broad question, but for those who don't know, what does mindfulness mean? What does it mean to you? And why is it important? Especially for our communities, because I feel like a lot of folks, especially if we're talking about the Southern region in general, a lot of folks endure so much stress, and we're enduring amplified stressors and like different exacerbators or stressors with climate change. So what does mindfulness mean to you is what all I'm trying to say. We'll start with Piero and I'll hand it back to Knellee.
Okay.
Feel free to jump in whenever y'all are ready.
So mindfulness, there's a operational definition of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose to whatever is happening in the present moment with an open-hearted curiosity, without adding commentary, without rushing to judge, just observing life. So when I say that I teach mindfulness meditation and mindful living, I think it's a more precise way of explaining what mindfulness is. Mindfulness meditation is the practice, and mindful living is the game, if you create a simile with sports, right? So you practice a series of techniques. So meditation is one of the techniques in mindfulness that we practice, but we can practice mindfulness walking or mindful walking, mindful eating, mindful movement, mindful sitting meditation. So there are many techniques that you practice. But what for? Well, for you to live more mindfully, for you to bring attention to your life, for you to be in the present moment. I like the quote that says, whatever happened in the past when it happened. It actually happened in the present moment. And whatever will happen in the future, when it happens, it will also happen in the present moment. So it's super important for us to be present, because it is in the present moment, in the here now, that we make decisions that are going to affect the quality of our lives and are going to affect the future of the planet. So we need to be mindful of our choices, of the choices that we make. So this is something that we teach. We teach mindfulness meditation and mindful living. And our emphasis is, to bring mindfulness to activists and to bring activism to meditators, because sometimes meditators are not engaged, and we want to bring this activism to them. And knowing that, as you so well know, Abigail, how easy it is to burn out in the middle of activism, we try to bring meditation as a way of creating resilience, if you will, for them to carry on. As we usually say, it's not a sprint, it is a marathon. So I'll pass it on to Knellee.
So everything that Piero said, thank you, Piero, was so well articulated, especially this notion of, we're playing this game, right? And we need to practice in order to play the game. So what mindfulness means to me really is survival. I remember being 11 or 12 years old, the first time that I experienced something that I give credit to the School of Philosophy and Meditation, which is a global school that I attended as a kid growing up, in addition to regular school, where I simply learned how to live in the present moment. And the first practice that I did, they call the exercise, was a practice of being present through the senses, just paying attention to what is happening right now. So even right now, for those that are listening, you can practice mindfulness by simply listening to the sound of the voices on the podcast, by noticing the emotions that are, or the thoughts that are coming up for you as you listen. And so the interplay of experience in the present, noticing what's happening through our senses, noticing what's happening in our minds and heart states. In other words, the full dimension of human experience. If I go back to my experience growing up, I discovered at a young age, through that experience of living in the present, whether I was meditating or whether I was washing dishes or whether I was sweeping the floor, that we could practice all of the time, as long as we remembered, but that we could also train ourselves to practice, right? And so there's this way of explaining mindfulness, which I experience, which is, what does the state of it feel like, right? There's a state when we practice of expansion. There's this, whether we're, there are different ways, if we're going to get technical, of being aware. We can be aware in a very focused way. We can be aware in a very expansive way. But most of the times when we come into the present, the quality of the awareness that we experience informs the way that we see the world. And when I was growing up, many times I had this experience in practice that I was not separate from the person next to me, and I was not separate from anything. I wasn't separate from the tree or from the earth. And so I discovered that through my mindfulness practice. And I feel a sense of deep gratitude, because I think that the work that we're doing today, in large part, is informed by that view, a view that is not something that someone told me, or something that was, even as it was being taught, it was not something that I was asked to believe. It didn't interfere with any belief systems that was in my home at the time, but it was simply a way of being in relationship to myself, to other humans, and to the planet, that allowed me to then make choices about how I wanted to be and who I wanted to be. And obviously I'm still learning and growing as an individual. But why is this important? It's important because this is what we are doing is we are creating an environment, a container, a space for humans to experience themselves in nature and as nature, because we know from our own practice that once we enter our experience with that view, once we allow ourselves to let go of the past and the future, not only are we intentionally training our brains, right, at what we call a trait level of mindfulness in neuroscience, we're not just training ourselves to be present, we're also allowing ourselves to, our bodies and our hearts and our minds to regulate, to become regulated. And so this is why when we talk about mindfulness, it's not just about healing the person. It's not just about, this idea that, okay, we want a more kind of holistic approach. Is because once we ourselves as activists begin to enter the practice in this way, we're not just taking better care of ourselves. We approach activism in a completely different way. We approach activism from what we call a one awareness approach, as opposed to us versus them, as opposed to me taking care of something else. When I take care of the planet, I'm actually taking care of myself. And what Piero said about bringing activism to meditators, that last point is super important there, because we live in a very individualistic culture. And so when we teach anything, even a practice that's not intended to be individualistic, it takes on an individualistic feel and lens. So even the practice of mindfulness, because it's about owning the way that we show up, the way that we relate to the world, it can be interpreted and practiced that way. And so what we are doing through the Be Nature program, and really through all of the mindfulness we teach, is it's not even about social mindfulness. There's no separation period. So when we are practicing, it's not just about us. As Piero says often, when we practice, we're practicing for the whole world. So we use, and I know we're going to get more into this, but I'll just add is that we're bridging our experience as facilitators with nature as a facilitator, nature as the protagonist, nature as the ultimate sort of vehicle for teaching mindfulness, because it's natural and it's there. And so we're really, as facilitators, in our own imperfect way and through AHAM Education, bringing this both into, at the very grassroots level, offering spaces where people can have these experiences, but then also taking it to an advocacy level through SEN and through COP and through the UN. So it seems like a simple practice, and it is, but it's very transformative. And I think that's why we're so passionate about this work.
Wow. Wow. I am just taking notes as y'all are writing, just full disclosure, because I'm writing down these quotes because they're so good. I mean, I really, full disclosure, I've been in therapy for over a decade, and I've been trying to practice not trying to practice mindfulness. I've been practicing mindfulness and learning. Do or do not, there is no try. But, I love that y'all brought up that it's holistic. I also love that y'all both brought up how mindfulness and being in the present and really focusing on, how do I put this? When you are truly in the present, you cannot ignore what's going around you. And I'm thankful for y'all bringing that up. And I'm thankful that y'all brought up how important it is for especially activists to continue to regulate themselves because, oh my God, this work can be so emotional, and honestly, depending on where you are and where you're doing the work and how you're doing it, you can be traumatized or exposed to trauma. And so y'all kind of mentioned it already, but I would love for both of y'all to kind of go into this further. Since the title of this episode is called Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet, how can practicing mindfulness help us heal our communities and our planet? Y'all both mentioned about regulation. I would love to talk more about that. But yeah, we'll start with, my gut says Knellee, but I saw Piero go off mute. So.
Can you hear me or no?
No, we cannot hear you. Okay, perfect. Then we'll go to Knellee Knellee and then Piero.
So the question is, how can
practicing mindfulness help us heal our communities and our planet?
Yeah, if we look at it from a neuroscience perspective, right? There's a lot of research on what mindfulness does, whether you're an activist or in any role, right? It's just the power of the practice as a tool for awareness, self-regulation, all of the components of emotional intelligence, which also have to do with, in addition to awareness and regulation, have to do with relational skills, empathy, and compassion. So, I'd like to answer this just through a story of a group that I worked with recently within the last year. We worked with GASP actually, and their entire team went through a training over multiple weeks where they integrated mindfulness-based practice in their personal lives and into their organizational practices. So GASP is an organization in Alabama that's focused on stopping pollution. And so what the staff kind of revealed, the common thread were two things. One was that even though they knew that self-care was important, they were not making the time for it. So there is something about going through a process that's highly experiential, where we learn these practices, right? So it's not enough to know what we're saying is true. What's important is for individuals to allow themselves to go through a process where they actively learn with the guidance of an instructor. I love apps, but I don't think apps help. I think apps can help to sustain practice, but not necessarily to cultivate a practice if you haven't done it before. And so they taught. So most of the staff said that they took better. By the end of the training, they found that they were taking better care of themselves. That eco-grief and climate anxiety, which is very real, especially for the young activists, and two of them were young Black female activists living in communities that were not engaged in climate activism, even though they were the most affected by it. And so they found that dealing with both the grief and the anxiety around knowing what was happening in their community and having the ability to communicate, because one of the things we teach in our program is mindful and nonviolent communication. And so they, as a team, actually used the formula that they got in the training of how to apply mindful nonviolent communication in the way that they were talking to peers in their network, and also in the way that they were advocating to stop pollution in their state. The director even shared that, and there's more on this in a documentary that we're coming out with, where they gave these testimonials about how it helped him as a leader to communicate with his staff, because there's a lot of internal issues that come up even within the movement. So, these are just some concrete feedback that we've received from activists. So it's not just about self-care, it's also about how are we advocating? It's also about how are we building bridges in the way that we communicate? And are we successful? Are we solving a problem today to create another problem tomorrow? The other thing that I'll say, and then I'll let Piero share, is his views, is that this notion of, so it's heal yourself to heal the planet, and it's also heal the planet to heal yourself, right? So we have also found through some of our community engagement that when we invite people into natural healing spaces, who may, when I say people in the community, right? So we have a BIPOC community of practice that meet on the beach to meditate. And what we've found is because they've built a more of an affinity with nature, when we started doing what we call the mindful beach cleanups, they started to become more and more aware of how taking care of the planet was part of their healing journey. So these are people who are not engaged in activism at all for the most part. And so what we quickly learned how to do is to leverage that opportunity and to provide points of access where they could learn about, zero waste, where they could learn about soil, where they could learn about any legislation on rights to clean water that was happening. And so we've only just begun to kind of scratch the surface of how we connect those who become engaged in that journey of taking care of nature with real policy level activism. But we found that this is a way to engage folks that ordinarily would not be engaged in climate activism. So there's like two different angles here, of how kind of we have been finding this. And obviously we continue to grow and meet others who are doing similar work and learn from them, in our advocacy work.
Wow. That hit the nail on the head. I'm speechless. Piero, would you like to jump in?
Yes.
So the question is, how can
for presenting everything that you did.
Oh, sorry.
No, I just want to make sure that you can hear me and you can hear me well.
You sound perfect.
Good. So I want to thank Knellee for everything that she has presented, the work that we do. What comes to mind are a few things. Why practice mindfulness, right? Well, sometimes we think of this on a selfish way, but when we're practicing mindfulness, we're not doing this for ourselves alone. Whenever I end our mindfulness practices, I usually say, we bring our hands together to express gratitude to each other for showing up, for being here, and for practicing. And we bring to mind once again that our practice is not selfish. We do not practice for ourselves alone because our practice benefits the entire world. So we bow to each other in gratitude with a thankful heart, saying thank you for your practice. So the idea is that when we practice, although it has a personal benefit, it's benefiting the world, right? And so why the practice is important? Well, the practice transforms us, is transformative. I like what Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk and, a teacher of mindfulness said or wrote, and this is a quote, "We cannot change the world if we're not able to change our way of thinking. Without collective change in our way of thinking, we cannot expect the world to change. Collective awakening is made of individual awakenings. If you are an activist and you're eager to do something, you should begin with yourself and your own mind." So here is very clear. He's saying, okay, there's a way of participating in this activism. I'll give a personal story. I live very close to the beach, and pretty much every week, a few times a week, I go to the beach early in the morning when the sun is coming up, and I do a beach cleanup. I did this morning, for instance. Mondays are days where the harvest of trash is bigger because people come during the weekend and leave stuff behind. I'm very concerned with plastic pollution everywhere, especially plastic pollution in the ocean. So I go every morning or many mornings during the week, as I said, and I do the beach cleanup. In the beginning, it wasn't mindful, let me put it this way. I was very irritated that people were so inconsiderate and so lazy that they wouldn't take the trash with them. And this is not a remote beach. There are trash bins at walking distance, and it's so easy. But people would leave, and they usually leave bottles and cans and carton and plastic, a lot of plastic. But then I realized that I could change my mindset, and I could approach that practice of beach cleanup in a mindful way. So instead of judging people, instead of criticizing people, instead of being upset by carelessness, I was just doing it. And this showed to me that I was not wasting energy, that I was able to do the work, the same work that I did before when I was upset. I was doing the work without losing energy because I was judging, criticizing people. So this is an example when you bring mindfulness to what you do, when you bring mindfulness to the present moment, you can save energy and perhaps you can be more effective. And I think that Knellee said, well, there's different levels of awareness. I like to talk about 6 words that start with the letter A that I think are important in this practice of mindfulness. The first one is awake. So most of the time, we're not awake, we're sleepwalking through life. So mindfulness is an invitation for us to wake up. Am I awake? Am I really here now? Or am I lost in the past or visiting the future? The second one is alert. And alert for me is a kind of expansive awareness. I mean, I am alert of what's happening in my environment. I am alert to what's happening in the world, to the planet. Then the third A is attentive. And attentive has to do with focusing my attention and shying away or staying away from distractions. So I'm here, I'm talking to you. I know that I'm talking to an audience right now. So I'm present, I am attentive. So if I am awake, alert, and attentive, then I am aware. And what happens is that when I am aware, I become appreciative. So there's a new component that shows up. I start to appreciate the beauty that surrounds me. And, I go around and I see magic. I call the 3 M's, the magic, the mystery, and the miracles all around me. So you develop a love for the planet. It's like I feel the breeze, I feel the warmth of the sun, sense the leaves. It's magical. So if you are awake, alert, attentive, aware, and appreciative, then you are fully alive. And you are able to bring life. So you're able to preserve life. So this is an example of how mindfulness can inform activism and how mindfulness can help activists.
Thank you so much. That sounds like the medicine that I think a lot of folks, if not everyone on our planet, needs. How can people incorporate mindfulness into their life between a lot of other, like, I feel like a lot of folks feel like they don't have the time or the energy to incorporate mindfulness, especially since their mind is so spread out. How can people incorporate it into their lives from as small, like the littlest things to like big things, starting with Piero and then moving to Knellee? How do we incorporate those things?
You know, it's not difficult to be mindful. What is difficult is to remember to be mindful. So to be mindful is very easy. To be mindful is to be present, to know what's going on, to know what you're feeling, your physical sensations, your thoughts, your emotions. And the practice is a practice that allows you to be more aware of what I'm feeling right now. Where are these thoughts coming from? Why am I thinking about the bully in 8th grade? This happened 3 decades ago. I don't have to think about this anymore. So you catch yourself, you understand thoughts, the nature of thoughts, and you don't give them a lot of validity. They say, well, we're not trying to control our thoughts. What we're doing is trying to prevent our thoughts from controlling us. And this is what you do with mindfulness. So mindful living is being present, being as much as possible aware of what's going on in the present moment. So you can practice mindfulness all the time. I mean, I'm taking a shower. Am I aware that I'm taking a shower? You know, or you take a shower in the morning and you get to the end of the day and then you ask yourself, did I shower today or not? And why do you ask this question? It's because you were not there. Your mind was elsewhere. You were thinking about your to-do list. You're having a mental conversation with your boss. You're not even aware of how much water you are using in the shower or how mindful you are of, the running water, for instance. And there's so many levels of awareness that you can bring. A lot of the work that we do with AHAM Education has to do with water, healing in water. We have several, I would say, sister organizations that are working with communities to bring mindfulness to them in the water and the healing in the water as well. So I'm just giving an example that, yes, mindfulness meditation is the practice. And I don't know a better way to bring mindfulness to your life than doing the original mindfulness-based stress reduction program. It's a program of 8 weeks that you meet once a week for 2.5 hours, and you go home and you practice 45 minutes every day during this period of 8 weeks. So that's the best possible introduction that I know, and I don't hesitate to say this, to mindfulness, to establish a mindfulness meditation practice. And then it's up to you. It's kind of meditate 20 minutes a day or 45 minutes a day or 1 hour a day. But we're going to falter. We're not going to be able to keep the discipline. It happens to all of us. Imagine a physical fitness exercise or a diet. Same thing with the meditation regime. Oh, I'm going to start and I'm going to stick to it because I know it's good. And then, life happens. But we have a saying that is so mindful in a way, because it doesn't matter if you didn't meditate this today. It didn't matter if you didn't meditate this week or this month or this year or for the last 5 years. Just start over. Just begin again, because everything that matters is the present moment. So you can always start over. You can always begin again. So I think that these are things that you learn as you practice. But I like to say practice is important, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the performance during the game of life. It's how you show up in life. Are you showing up as a mindful person, as a patient, kind, generous person, as a person that really is concerned about the future of life on this planet? So this is what's important in the end. This is the practice and the game.
And it sounds like to me, mindfulness is almost a way of living and the way you kind of move through life as well. Knellee, I would love to hear your thoughts. How can you incorporate it into daily things?
So, I think Piero really laid that out beautifully because, well, I'll go back to my experience and to the neuroscience, right? So, I wish I could say, I wish I could give someone, a shortcut, but there are no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts because, we live in a world that is by design currently causing us to live at a pace that isn't sustainable. The mainstream society, just the way in which we use the resources we have, the way in which we're expected to work, the advancement of technology, all of it is really, if we don't live mindfully, is pulling us towards decline and despair. So we don't have a choice. This is the way I see it. We really don't have a choice if we want to live a joyful life and if we want to be able to have resources for the next generation. So I think the way to integrate mindfulness begins with a decision. How deep is your desire to live a joyful life? How deep is your desire to leave behind a world that's better for future generations, for your children? Not even future generations, it's happening now. So it begins with a decision and a desire. So once you make a decision, I think what Piero shared is so relevant. Then you make a decision, but you hold your goals lightly, right? It's, one of the attitudes of mindfulness is non-judgment. So this tendency that we have to criticize ourselves, the way that we talk to ourselves, becomes hugely important just as a practice of even cultivating a mindfulness practice and not being able to do it perfectly. So it's not about perfection. It's not about, having to get it right all the time. But I do think a decision that this is how I want and choose to be in the world, and that I will do whatever it takes to cultivate a practice. On a more concrete level, I don't know of any other way to cultivate mindful living without having a practice. It's just not possible. So unless you're like the Dalai Lama or one of the sages or of the many realized souls that have walked the earth, we all have to find a way to practice. Now, that can look different for different people, but whatever the practice is, if you learn it through the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, and as a teacher of that program, I do agree that it's one of the best ways to learn mindfulness and to cultivate a practice. It requires commitment. But there are other ways, right? And so once you made the decision, then set aside the time every day when you wake up, before you go to bed. You decide when that is, but without sitting in silence. And we do practice walking meditation. We do many practices in nature, even going outside and feeling your feet in the grass, whatever it is. For me, the ingredients have to be stillness, silence, where there's nothing external that's getting in the way of being with what's happening in the present moment. There must be some time set aside on a regular or daily basis where we're coming to terms with that. Because that is the foundation for remembering. Piero talks about it's not difficult to practice, difficult to remember. So the neuroscience validates this, that when people cultivate a routine, a habit, right? And this is true for physical exercise. When we build that muscle, we change the default patterns in our brain. We remember more and we practice more voluntarily. And that's what supports mindful living. Because when I'm washing the dishes, when I'm in the store, I use this example a lot. If I'm in the mall, I get caught up in the fashion, I get caught up in the egoistic desires to have things. And then I wake up. I wake up because I'm practicing. I wake up and I realize, well, I don't need another coat. I have a coat already. Or I need a coat, but let me look at the label. What is it made of? Is it going to go into a landfill, or is it something that's going to be able to biodegrade? Who am I supporting when I buy this? So mindfulness is very, very real in daily life, in the choices we make about our self-care, but also the choices we make about the planet, the choices about who is affected in the chain of events that bring food on my plate, like when we practice mindful eating. But the foundation, going back to folks who are listening, you have to make a decision that this is who you want to be. And then you need to figure out, how am I going to practice every day? And that's between you and however you learn that practice, whether it's 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 40 minutes, whatever the time is that you practice regularly, because that is going to lay the foundation for your brain and your body to wake up more frequently in daily life. And you will see the change. I mean, Piero and I have experienced this in our lives. If you talk to anybody that have been through this journey, they will tell you, even when you feel like you've fallen off the horse for a long period of time, the fact that you made a conscious decision and you planted that seed, you will always come back to the practice, even when you falter. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's hugely important, to be very intentional and to not be like, oh, I'm going to integrate this into my self-care. It cannot be haphazard. It has to be very intentional, a very intentional decision that we make about who we are and who we want to be for the world.
Let me add something, if I may. It's not one more thing. Meditation, mindfulness meditation or the practice is not one more thing to include in your to-do list. And it should not be seen this way, because mindfulness is really a way of being in the world. So you are living mindfully. You are showing up differently. So there are some elements that are important for the practice. I think that 5 elements that I think are important. One is silence. We live in a noisy world, and if you think about it, we are so distracted. There are so many things trying to capture our attention, and we can talk about attention span, how diminutive it is. But so the first thing is silence. Then we need to slow down and come to some sort of stillness. It's very difficult sometimes because we want to be moving. We want to do more, have more, and be more all the time. And so to be still, it's almost like we feel guilty. What I'm doing here, doing nothing, I should be doing something. Then there is a component of solitude. To be alone, right? Blaise Pascal, the 17th century philosopher, he has this beautiful quote. He said, all humanity's problems stem from the inability of man to sit quietly in a room alone. So imagine if we were able to sit quietly, all of us, in a room alone. Perhaps we will not be creating this madhouse that we are creating, right? And then the other element is simplicity. Mindfulness itself or mindfulness practice is very simple. There's nothing complicated about sitting, being there, and observing. So I think that silence, slowness, stillness, solitude, and simplicity can lead to some fruits like an expansion. You can experience serenity. You grow in selflessness, meaning that you're not so much self-centered, and you become other-centered. And you kind of surrender to the callings of the world, and you become of service to others. So that's the beauty of mindfulness leading to activism. Naturally, it's almost natural. I mean, you experience that expansion, you experience that serenity, you experience that selflessness, as I say, you surrender to what's calling you, and then you become of service to others. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you so much. I think this actually takes us to our last point very well, which is with all this being overwhelming, with how easy it is to get torn in so many different directions, and with folks having mental health, I think more and more folks are realizing that their mental health is being affected by, everything that's going on, and it can be a lot. So I just want to close off this episode with asking y'all, what gives you hope, or what are any final thoughts y'all have for our listeners today? And either one of y'all can just jump in.
I can go and say that we need a big change in the ways that we have been living in order to save life on the planet. The planet will go on without us, right? But we cannot presume that the human species will go on. We are seeing what's happening, and many people are oblivious to the magnitude of the tragedy that is unfolding right now. But the big change that needs to happen, in my opinion, is the way that we live. We are obsessed with consumerism and growth. So if you think about how we measure the success of a country, it's by the growth of the GDP. And what is the growth of GDP? More production, more consumption. If you think about success in the personal level, how is it measured? Oh, it's the one who consumes the most, who has accumulates more, who has more toys, and probably the one who generates more waste also than anybody else. And what is the measure of success? It cannot be growth, anymore. It has to be a way of being in this world and creating the least waste, consuming probably less than we are doing. So when I was born 70 years ago in 1953, there were 2.5 billion humans in the world. During my lifetime, I have seen the population of the world more than triple. So from 2.5 billion, now we are at 8 billion people in the world. And we're putting an enormous pressure on the resources of this planet. Everything, from land to water to deforestation. I'm not going to go through all this, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I think that one of the things that needs to change is really a change of paradigm. We need to live differently. We need to change the way that we have been living. We are too obsessed with comfort. We're too obsessed with doing more, having more, and even being more. So our existence on Earth is very violent, and we need to probably pause for a long while and meditate and figure out how we are going to continue moving forward.
Thank you. I agree with that. Okay, I agree with that. Knellee?
Yeah, I love everything that Piero said. You know, and it reminds me, so we recently, AHAM Education, we led a delegation, and Piero was there. He was there virtually. We led a delegation to the UN Water Conference. Several of the SEN members attended. Our sister organizations that Piero mentioned were there, from Diversity in Aquatics, 7 Directions, and some of our other partners. And the event that we held was entitled Creating a New Paradigm for Resiliency and related to water justice and healing. And some of what Piero spoke about, you know, what was really interesting is that the indigenous traditions, which every continent on the planet has an indigenous tradition that's still somewhat alive. I'm of East Indian descent, and when I think back, on my ancestors and even my parents' generation, my generation is the first that we don't have our hands in the dirt every day. And that was a conscious shift that happened in my generation. And when I think about it, my parents and my grandparents were pressured for us to unlearn their ways and to learn the ways of a Western post-colonial society. So I think part of the paradigm shift has to do with not lingering on, but owning up to how we got ourselves here. What is it in the dominant Western and now global culture that causes us to focus on unbridled growth that only causes us more harm? And to recognize that the issue of climate, the issue of the planet, is connected to the ways in which, we've lost some of our heritage, the ways in which we continue to be unjust to people who are not like us, the ways in which we separate and divide. And so this all kind of comes full circle with mindfulness, because in mindfulness practice, one of there's a meditation and sort of the actual experience of being in the present. And then there's something that we practice called inquiry or mindful inquiry. And mindful inquiry is about investigating the me, the mind, the me, my, and mine. Part of it is investigating when we notice that whatever experience we're having, there's this tendency to crave or to attach or to where the ego becomes activated, and to just notice that, because the things that we attach ourselves to, the labels, the desires to have things, as Piero was saying, the desire to do more, have more, and be more, comes from this grip that the ego, or that are the way in which we cling to different people or things in the world. It comes from not being conscious and present. And so when we practice mindfulness, at the very minimum, we become, and I'm using Piero's words here in his 5 A's, we become awake and alert to the me, my, and mine. So I think this paradigm shift is about really, it goes back to, investigating why is it that we want to consume so much? Why is it that we're so unhappy with what we have? Why do we need? Why is there so much more? Why is there so much greed in the world? And it's because people are disconnected from who they really are. And so I think that's something really powerful. It's not a fast track. It's probably a slower track to that solution. But I think mindfulness and contemplative practice offers that. I would even venture to say some of the faith-based activism that's happening is kind of championing this mindset and heart set. And so I have hope because people like Piero and I and many, many others are focused in this way. I was just at the high-level political forum at the United Nations in New York, and I was so happy and felt so hopeful to be part of a group that are from both faith-based and non-faith-based and different entities that have decided to write a paper and to present a paper to the governments and the different UN agencies on the way in which we're engaging with this crisis, both the mental health crisis and the planet crisis. And so the consensus is to do this work from a place of wholeness, love, and compassion, as opposed to fight, flight, fear, and division. And so, that gives me hope when I find that there are other people silently, they're not in the headlines, they're not on stage all the time. But I believe that there is I have a sense, maybe because I'm in this bubble, that there is a silent revolution happening where people are waking up to themselves because they have no choice. The way that things are is not sustainable. And some come to it by force and some come to it because they make a decision. So that makes me hopeful. The other thing at that same event I had and even before this, I had this, sense of, well, it wasn't an epiphany, but I connected more deeply to the importance of youth leadership and voice, which has always been important to AHAM Education. But it suddenly dawned on me that, as I was mostly socializing with people in their 20s and early 30s, that they know how to solve this problem. And we need to stop just giving them, a voice as a form of tokenism. We really need to let them drive this change. And I was, I felt so rejuvenated being around them. They're very practical, this new generation. And I really think that I'm hopeful because they are not taking no for an answer. And they're taking the future in their own hands. So, we are more and more working to empower young people. We're training them to be leaders, and we're training them to do what we do so that they're equipped. They're equipped to do this work in a way that's wholesome and sustainable for themselves. The last thing I'll say is that, the late Sir Ken Robinson, who is an education activist, he said one time, and I was listening to a talk that he did, and he said that, we're not really here to save the planet. We're here to save ourselves, because the planet will just shake us off like a bad rash and continue rejuvenating, right? I remember when the pandemic first started, the first few months, we heard stories of clear skies that were once cloudy and overcast every day with smog and smoke. We heard that animals were emerging and walking in the streets. We saw images of nature rejuvenating itself. And it made me think, is anybody studying the power of nature to rejuvenate itself? Where is that information? So that made me hopeful, because I really believe that in the abundance and in the regenerative power of nature, in spite of us. And so even if it means that we destroy ourselves, I think that, nature will thrive and survive and will show us the way if we don't listen. So that's kind of a bittersweet hope, but I don't think that there's, I choose I choose to believe that there's a way out, and we're ingenious species, and that we know the answers. We just need the will and the political will to make it happen.
Hey, y'all, real quick before you go, post-editing Abigail here. After we got done recording, Knellee and Piero brought up some really awesome information and action steps, and honestly, some direct ways you can get information about how to begin your mindfulness journey directly from some experts themselves. And so please stick around to hear this little bit. And honestly, it ends on such a good note that we couldn't cut it out. All right, thanks. Enjoy.
So kind of going back to how can folks integrate mindfulness into their activism, into their daily life. AHAM offers courses, mindfulness-based stress reduction courses. I'll also let Piero kind of speak to his offerings outside of AHAM Education. We offer on a regular basis, but through the work that we're doing at the UN, at the United Nations, we're an organization with consultative status to the United Nations, and we're also a member of SEN and many other groups that are working towards climate justice and well-being. So we offer in-house training to any organization or group that would like to incorporate or integrate these practices both into their kind of staff policy and well-being, but also into their strategy for the work that they're doing on the front lines. And then we are also building awareness through a film called Healing People, Heal the Planet. This is a film about the story of AHAM's work that was funded through the Film in the Field project, a collaboration by SEN and Exposure Labs. So we're really excited to announce that by the time you all are listening to this, that the film will be launched during Climate Week, and you will have the opportunity to see the film through various opportunities that we'll provide. Lastly, I'll say that I am really honored to have worked very closely with Piero in creating the Be Nature program. So we spell it B.Nature program. And the Be Nature program really captures what we've been talking about, bringing mindfulness to activists and bringing activism, eco-activism to mindfulness. And so the idea is through building eco-awareness, we cultivate eco-affinity. And through that eco-affinity, we engage in eco-action. And so I hope that many of you listening will have the opportunity to either do one of our activist training or participate in the Be Nature retreats that we offer year-round. So I'll hand it over to Piero to share any offerings that are coming up that you might want to talk about.
So I want to thank you now, Knellee, as well, and Abigail as well for hosting. I'm very happy to be here. And sending a message to the audience, really, for the listeners. Thank you for sticking with us, for listening to this interview, this podcast. And hopefully this has encouraged you to try to practice mindfulness meditation and to live more mindfully. I know that in the resources you will find my website. That is my first name and last name together.com, pierofalci.com. And you will see some of the programs that I mentioned, like the mindfulness-based stress reduction or the mind-body skills groups. But several other short workshops that you can bring, that Knellee and I can bring to your groups, to your communities, like, for instance, an introduction to mindfulness meditation and mindful living, or mindful and nonviolent communication that we think is super important for activists. So these are just examples. You can also go to ahameducation.org And you will find also this website listed in the resources of the program today. If you want to know more about mindfulness, and this is not self-promotion, it's just that I think this is a really good resource. It's a 3-book series that I have written, and the first volume is called A Better Mind, Can Mindfulness Make Us Wiser? The second one is called A Better Life, Can Mindfulness Make Us Happier? And the third one is called A Better World, Can Mindfulness Save Us from Ourselves? So if you are interested in what we said and you want to continue this conversation, perhaps you can check these books. But more than anything else, I encourage you to try mindfulness if this is new to you. And I want to thank you for listening and for the good work that you do. We really need many, many people on this front in order to save life on this planet. So thank you, all of you.
Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money, a Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.